There we go. Okay, we'll go ahead and jump into it then. All right, so thanks for joining. We're talking about financial aid, everything that you need to know. As you know, my name is Jeff Burke. I am the founder and financial planner here at 7th Street Financial. And one of the things that I do in our firm here is we focus on college planning as one of our areas of expertise. Specifically, working with families to identify colleges that are a financial fit. I'm not going to really focus on that too much tonight. This is really going to be honing in kind of specifically on the financial aid process, the different types of aid that are available. So we can talk about the other stuff at the end. So the areas that I do want to cover here tonight are: 1, we'll go over the cost of college. 2, we'll talk about the FAFSA, which is kind of the driver for this whole thing tonight. The EFC, and if you don't know what those stand for, that's fine. We'll cover it when we start going over that material. The process for determining financial need, the types of aid that are available to you. If you do have to go the route of loans, understanding what how the payments on those work, and then we'll have some Q&A. And if you've got questions at any time, go ahead and speak up. So to start with, the average cost of college is going to run between $80,000 and $300,000 over the course of 4 years. This is going to be the biggest expense you're going to have in your adult life, after, other than your house for the most part. The difference with a college compared to having the mortgage is generally by the time you move into that house, I know myself, I was 28 years old before I got into a house. I had been working for a few years, steady job, solid income, had experience with budgeting. I understood what that mortgage was going to look like, and as far as the financial impact to me. When it comes to college, though, we're asking 17, 18-year-old kids to understand what the impact of taking on X amount of student loan debt is going to mean to them when they're 25, 26 years old. And that can be a very tough thing for them to really wrap their arms around and totally understand. And evidenced by that, we are sitting right now with $1.6 trillion in student loan debt in the country. That's actually the second biggest area of debt in the country. That's more than we have in credit card. Only home mortgages is a higher amount of debt in the US today. So taking a look at some of the costs of colleges, here's a list of 10 of the most commonly attended schools by people here in the area. As you can see, on the more affordable end of things, we've got Normandale kind of representing that tech school, community college level. And as you see, if you strip out the room and board from those, those are coming in pretty inexpensive. The next tier that we have is other either smaller state schools that we've got, or some neighboring schools from Wisconsin, North Dakota, where we have reciprocity, meaning we have very favorable rates at those schools. And then we get into Duluth, kind of sits in a little middle spot there. Then we get our 2 real big state schools with Minnesota and Wisconsin. Moving into out-of-state schools where we don't have reciprocity, Iowa State and Iowa. And then finally St. Thomas, which represents that private school tier, of which we have quite a few of here in the Twin Cities. Now, these are the numbers. This is kind of the sticker price at the school. It does not necessarily mean that's what you are going to have to pay to go there, but that's kind of that retail sticker price as the starting point that we're looking at. And before we get into this financial aid thing, I do want to talk real quickly about the impact that COVID has had on this whole process. One of the big things that we've seen, and depending on where your kids are at in their cycle of things, it has been a real struggle with the ACT and SAT tests. They have been canceled in huge numbers across the country for months. Speaking as far as my own daughter goes, I know she's had tests that were canceled in March, April, May, June. I think there have been some kids who were able to maybe start taking them in August and September. But I've already seen even locally, some of the test locations have canceled their sites for October already. So that has been a real struggle, these standardized tests, to get those up and running. As a result, many schools, you may have seen this in the news, have decided to go test optional. But it's important to understand what that means. Schools are doing that from an admission standpoint. So that's just, they're not going to take that as a factor when it comes to saying, hey, we're going to accept you, admit you into this school. We're going to look at some other things. We'll maybe put a greater weight on GPA and maybe some other holistic things that they look at. You can still report your test scores if you'd like to, but it's optional to do it. It's not going to be held against you if you don't. Where it's not necessarily optional is for merit scholarships. Some states have gone there, but a lot of states, a lot of schools are still requiring those test scores at this point to get those automatic merit scholarships. And when I talk about that is there are schools from the list that we just showed. Iowa State's an example where if you have a certain ACT score and a GPA, you just get a scholarship, okay? Regardless of your financial situation, if you hit those thresholds, you're in line for a scholarship. Now, Iowa State is one school where they have waived the requirement for those ACT scores to be a component of that, but a lot of states across the country are still mandating that you have one of those test scores. The other thing that we've seen is that the elite private schools and large state schools are still getting their enrollment numbers. They're not really hurting too bad on that. Now, they may be having to dip down into that second tier of students that they were otherwise looking at, but for the most part, they're still filling up their enrollment numbers and are doing just fine. That's coming at the expense of some of these other smaller private schools, though. The elite ones, like I said, are fine. So if you've got your Ivy League schools, other nationwide schools that, Notre Dame, Duke, UCLA, things like that, they're doing just fine. But there are some second and third tier private schools that are kind of hurting. And what you might see from those schools this year is that they're going to be much more aggressive with their aid, trying to entice people to come in there so that they can get their enrollment numbers where they need it to be. And finally, what we're going to see, I think, is a huge numbers of here for the 2021 school year, is that families are going to have to be we're going to see a large number of families, I think, appealing their financial aid packages due to changes in their financial situation as a result of COVID. We know that there's millions of families that have either lost jobs or have certainly maybe taken a reduction in income. And I'm going to walk through in a little bit here when we get through how financial aid is determined, where that may not be being factored in as far as part of that initial calculation goes. So real quickly, let's talk about what your cost of school is going to be. In order to understand what your cost of school is, we take that cost of attendance, which is that first chart that I showed you for the cost of the schools. Now, true cost of attendance, when it's factored in for this formula here, schools may bring other considerations into play. I've seen schools bring in students' personal expenses, travel, expected travel costs. Those can get in there. So the cost of attendance figure might be several $1,000s more than what you're looking at from just a sticker price of the school. But we start there, and then we take away the need-based grants that you in line for, merit-based, more scholarships that you could be in line for, and we kind of come up with your cost of school on that. And then from there, we take that and we compare it to whatever your financial resources are. And once we take away the financial resources from your cost of the school, if there's any gap in there, that's really what your financial need is. So let's talk about financial aid. Now, this process opens up tomorrow. In October of your senior year, the financial aid forms become available, and that's October 1. So tomorrow, the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid, becomes available to people across the country. Now, this is the dominant form that's used by most public schools across the country. The CSS is another form that is used more widely by private schools, not so much by the public schools. So the FAFSA is one that will be most common for people. Now, as far as when you need to get in and start filling this out, it really depends. We are expecting a ton of people to jump in there tomorrow and the rest of this week to try to get those forms filled out as quickly as possible. And I wouldn't be surprised to see that website crashing. It kind of does that first week every year. So just kind of be prepared for that if that's something you want to get in tomorrow and start hammering away on. Otherwise, the deadline really varies by school. Each school is going to have their own deadlines as far as when they want to have all that financial information submitted, because they're going to use that to process scholarships and grants. And, normally that's somewhere 1st of November might be about the first deadline that you really start to see. So you do have some time to get this in. Now, the end goal of filling out the FAFSA and the CSS form is to determine your EFC. And this is your expected family contribution. So after you go through all the formula and everything like that, this is the amount that the U.S. Department of Education is expecting you to be able to contribute towards the cost of college for your family for that year. But now one key thing to note is it's across every student that you have in your family, and it's split amongst them. So let's say that you calculate an EFC of $60,000 if you have one kid in college for that year. The government's basically going to say, hey, we're expecting you to be able to contribute $60,000 for that one child. A year later, you still have the same EFC of $60,000, say, but now you have another child that's in college. That's going to be split between those two kids, and your EFC is really going to be $30,000 for each of your two children. Now, how is this EFC calculated? Well, largely it's going to be driven by your income. You may have heard from other places that they use what's called the prior year tax return. And so what that means is, since we're looking at using this for the 2021 school year, the prior year would be 2020, the prior would be 2019. So we are going to be using that 2019 tax return in your financial information to drive your eligibility for financial aid for the 2021-22 school year. Now, it kind of makes sense because since that is just being opened up tomorrow, really the 2019 is your most recent tax return. So by the time the money is awarded and the kid's in school, it ends up being kind of 2 years ago. So what's included in this? Like I said, largely driven off of your income, but there are some key things that are excluded from this. Your home equity is excluded. Money that you have invested in your retirement plans are excluded. Now, one thing that is included is if you do have any rental or vacation properties, those are brought in, as are any non-retirement investment accounts. Okay, those will all get brought in. Now, that's on the FAFSA side. On the CSS, they may bring some of those other items in, as that calculation is a little bit different. From a FAFSA perspective, the parent assets are assessed at 5.64%. So they're not dinged too heavily. In contrast to that, the student assets are assessed at 20%, much higher rate. So that's where, from a planning perspective, when trying to figure out how to do this, it's kind of always best to have the assets in the parent's name, not the child's name, because they're going to be assessed at such a higher rate if they're in the child's name. Now, the one big question is, how are 529 plans accounted for this? Since this is where so many families have done their savings for their kids' education. It really comes down to who is the account owner on a 529 plan. So in looking at my own situation, my wife and I are joint owners of the 529 plan. Our daughter is the beneficiary who's going to be expected to get those funds. So in that case, if the parents own the 529 plan, it's assessed at that 5.64% rate. Instead, let's say if the 529 plan is owned by the grandparents, it's not assessed at all at the initial time that you file. Only once the funds are taken out of the 529 and actually used for the education does it become an issue. And the catch is, at that point, those funds become income for the student, and then they get assessed at that much higher rate. So one of the little tricks that you can do with that is if you've got a 529 plan that's owned by a grandparent, save that until like that junior, senior year, because by the time that income will hit their tax return, hopefully the kid's out of school and they don't get nailed for that. All right. So use parent funds up front, grandparent funds on the back end, if that's an option or at all possible. The other thing that you may see coming out of this is that the EFC that's calculated for you may not line up at all with what you think your available family resources are. I've seen cases on this where the EFC number comes in fairly high, you know, $60,000 and up, and the family is saying, you know, what are you talking about? Maybe we could do $20,000 a year. We can't do anywhere close to that amount to pay for college. So that's just the formula that it is. I'm not saying it's based on reality. It's just the way it works. This right here is a little screenshot of the FAFSA form itself. It kind of looks like a tax return, almost. It's a 5-6 page document. This is actually the student information section. And I don't know if you can see it, but it's asking for your tax return information. How much income did you have? What's the value of your cash and savings and checking accounts, things like that. So really gathering all of that financial information. Like I said, this just happens to be a snapshot of the student section. It'll do the same things for the parents as well. Now, let's talk about the need, determining if you are a financial need candidate. Pretty simply, we take that EFC calculation and then we subtract the cost of attendance from the school. If the cost of attendance is, if you can cover the cost of attendance, you're not a need-based candidate. Okay, so if your EFC is $50,000 and you're looking to go to University of Minnesota, which has an all-in price tag of probably $28,000, $29,000, they're expecting you to be able to cover all that. You're not going to be a candidate for need-based aid. On the flip side, if you're looking to go to a school, say Iowa State, that cost of attendance is going to be roughly about $35,000, and your EFC comes in at $25,000, you might be you might be in line for some need-based aid, right? There's a $10,000 gap there. It's no guarantee that you're going to get it, but at least you're in the running and you can be a candidate for it. We'll talk about the different types of aid that are available to you. 1 is grants, 2 loans, 3 work study. I'll talk about work study real quick here. I don't have a dedicated slide for work study, but it's very much what it sounds like. It's basically a job that you get while you're on campus. And instead of getting paid, that money goes towards the cost of your education. So you kind of might be thinking, well, why wouldn't I just go get a job, any job? The one benefit of doing a work study is, since it is tied into your student loans or to your financial aid package, it's a university gig. They know you're a student. The hours can be flexible, really accommodating to your schedule. That's kind of the one upside of doing the work study. The other thing that's really not included in here is the scholarships. And the reason for that is because scholarships aren't really a need-based thing. Scholarships are earned based on the merit of the student, and whether that's your academics, athletics, some other skill that you have, leadership, whatever it might be. It's not a need-based component. Now, there may be a need-based component to some of these scholarships, that maybe some of these private scholarships and things like that. But I'm not going to focus much on scholarships here. We're really going to focus in on grants and student loans. Now, the amount of need that you received, is, like I said, it's based on that EFC to your cost of attendance calculation, not your actual financial need, okay? It's all based on what they've determined that formula to be and the stated cost of attendance at the school. It is likely that when you get your financial aid reward letter back and the school comes back and says, hey, here's how we're going to do this, they may not meet 100% of your need, okay? Be ready for that. Each school is going to meet a different percentage of need, Okay, some are going to do everything they can to meet 100% of your need. Others may come in well below that. The other key thing to note is that each school that you are working with is going to meet that need in a different way with a different group of solutions, okay? Another thing to note is that schools will count loans as meeting your financial needs, even though that is money that you have to pay back. So a lot of people, when you think of, hey, I'm getting financial aid, I'm getting need, this is money that, I'm getting grants, I'm getting scholarships, this is money I don't have to pay back. Not true. Schools will count the loans toward that financial aid as saying, hey, we met your financial need, even if we're just giving you loans. Now, to kind of support that last slide here, this is a slide from a major state school. This I got off the website collegeboard.org. This is a good site available. It's got good information on a lot of schools. If you're trying to look at this sort of information. But there's also some stuff in here that can be very misleading for the average family. Now, the first thing that comes to my mind here is I see this. I see that the average first-year financial aid package is almost $14,000. So the trap that a lot of families fall into is they see that and they go, oh, okay, well, if I apply to this school, I can kind of expect that I'm going to get roughly $14,000 in aid. Not true. That's the average, right? So there's some kids that are getting a ton of money into there, and there's some that are getting almost zero. It just works out to be the average. Again, we have to look at what your individual circumstances are, the academic merit of your kid, everything else together to understand what you could be looking at. This is just an average. I would not apply to the school and expect that I'm going to get $14,000. Now, some of those other things that I was talking about, here, 99% of freshmen with need received financial aid. So that's great. So this school they're at least going to do everything they can to try to meet need and help you out. Now, however, they're only on average meeting 76% of that need. So like I said, be prepared that a school is not going to meet 100% of your need. Here, they're only meeting 76% at this school. Now, the next thing that we want to take a look at is how are they going to meet that need? And this little chart here to the left shows that where we've got 50, it's basically if the school's doing a 50-50 split between scholarships and grants, so money you don't have to pay back, versus loans or a work study. Work study you don't have to pay back, but you're definitely having to earn that money, and loans being money that you have to pay back. So that's something to be aware of too. And every school is going to have its own calculation on this. The percentage of need met and how they meet that need is different for every institution, okay? Now, let's get into the details of the various types of need-based aid. We're going to start with grants. Now, grants are great because you don't have to pay the money back, right? And there's multiple sources of grants. When we fill out the FAFSA, and that's going to go to the federal government, an option that's available there is the federal Pell Grant. Well, that's for families that have a much lower EFC, less than $6,000. Now, one thing to be aware of here is a lot of people are in the misconception of, hey, I don't have much money and I should be in line to get grants to kind of cover everything. Not necessarily. The federal Pell Grant has a maximum award of just a little under $6,500. Now, you can get that each year, but that's, as we saw, based on the sticker price of those colleges, that's far from going to be able to cover the full price of one of those schools. Another big source of grants might be coming from the states to their public schools. They tend to favor in-state students. Now, so Minnesota tends to do a pretty decent job of this, where they'll funnel money available for grants to the University of Minnesota, Duluth, Mankato, places like that. Now, if you're a Minnesota student and you apply to the University of Minnesota, University of Iowa, University of North Dakota, your EFC is going to be the same across all of those different schools. They're all going to have different costs, but you might be much less likely to receive grants at those out-of-state schools than you might from U of M. It's going to vary by school and by state, but that's kind of the way it tends to work. It's not to say you can't get a grant when you apply for an out-of-state school. You certainly can. It's just that they want it, kind of the thing is, right, those state schools, they want to try to take care of their own first. So that's money coming from the states. And then some individual institutions have their own money as well that they can provide for grants. This tends to be more some of these highly selective schools. They can be very generous with need-based aid. I'm thinking about schools, you know, like those Ivy League schools that you hear of, those ones I mentioned, Duke, Notre Dame, a University of Michigan from the Big Ten. Those more elite schools, if they want you as a student, if they've identified you as somebody that they think will enrich their student body, they will be very generous with need-based aid if they need to. They don't want finances to keep you from being able to attend those schools. Okay, so let's get into loans. The first one we're going to talk about is the federal direct subsidized loan. And this is the most favorable type. And you are doing this directly through the U.S. Department of Education. This is a need-based loan. Okay, so when you fill out that FAFSA, this qualifies you, puts you in the pipeline of whether or not you're a candidate for a subsidized loan. But one of the things that's kind of weird with that is the process is doled out by the schools. So when you fill out your FAFSA, you can list a number of schools that you want that information to go to. So the FAFSA will go out to those schools, and then each of those schools will take this information and they will come up with their own financial aid package to send back to you. And even though your EFC is the same at all of those universities, possibly, you know, assuming they're public schools, you'd have the same EFC at all of them. They're all going to come back with a different financial aid package, possibly different amounts of loans as well. The nice thing about this type of loan is you don't have to start paying it until you graduate. The interest doesn't start accruing while you're in college. They've got good loan rates or interest rates. The one catch is you're limited to only $23,000 of these total during the time you're in college. And they're only available to undergrads. So once you're in grad school, this one's off the table. Very similar is the federal direct unsubsidized loan, also through the U.S. Department of Education. And the two key differences on this one, though, is this one is not a need-based loan. So no matter how high your EFC comes in at, you could have a $200,000 EFC number. If you fill out the FAFSA, you can still tap into this loan if needed, okay? So kind of anybody can get these. The schools, again, will be able to determine the amount you can borrow. The downside on this one, the interest accrues over time, and you're limited to not a lot of money that you can get on this one during the time you're in school. Total of $8,000, $2,000 per year, okay? You still get good interest rates, but there's not a lot that you're going to be able to get in this loan during your time in college. The next one we'll talk about is PLUS loans, also available through the U.S. Department of Education. The big difference right here, this is kind of commonly known as the parent loan. This is not a loan taken out by the undergrad student. This is actually a loan taken out by the parents. The loan is in the parent's name. It's not in the undergrad's name. The parent is responsible for making the payments on this loan. Now, you can get a ton of money in these types of loans. Basically, whatever the cost of attendance is, less any other aid you've received, you can get in this loan. So as it will come up, it might say, hey, this is a $40,000 a year school. We've determined that you get $10,000 of aid. You still have a gap of $30,000. Press this button right here, and you're on your way for a $30,000 plus loan. So they're very easy to get, but they have high interest rates, and they also have high fees. You got to pay over a 4% fee up front just to even get the loan to begin with. The other thing is the interest starts accruing from day one. So this is definitely not as good of a loan, but you can take out big amounts of these loans, which is probably not necessarily a great thing. This is actually one of the largest areas of increasing debt we are seeing in these countries, this is actually the fastest area for adults over 50 in their debt. And it's not because they're going back to school, it's because they're taking loans out on behalf of their kids. And then finally, private loans. So this is when we've kind of maxed out those federal direct loans. Maybe you don't want to do the plus loan. You think you can get a better deal someplace else. This is something that you would get through your bank, credit union, basically just some non-government third-party entity. You're going to have to do a credit check on this. So most likely the parent, you're going to have to sign on as a co-signer for this loan because the kids probably don't have a great credit rating at this point. The one other thing to note on this is going to be driven by your credit rating. So the terms of these loans are all over the board, okay? The lengths of them, the interest rates, the length of the payment term, everything. It ranges all across the board. One thing to note, and we'll talk about this later, is these don't offer, you're not eligible for income-based repayment options with a private loan. I'll get more into what that is a little bit later. Here's an example of a private loan. I pulled this up from the Wells Fargo site. Again, you can take very large amounts of loans from here if you like. If you are not a candidate for those need-based aid and you need to go well beyond what is available through the subsidized and unsubsidized loans, you can take out the entire cost of attendance through these loans. And here on the chart, you can see the interest rates range really anywhere from about 3.5%, almost up to 12%. The fees will vary by the bank. Here with Wells Fargo, they're saying this is a 15-year repayment term, but really every bank is going to have their own terms to it, and where your credit score fits in will drive the terms that you get for that loan. So I can't really say, hey, here's what you can expect. It's probably just going to be somewhere in between this range for you. Now, one thing I want to do is kind of run through how, now putting all this together, given different EFCs and cost of attendances, how do the loans look when we stack it all up? So let's run through a couple examples here. The first one we've got is an EFC of $20,000 and a cost of attendance of $40,000. In this case, the student has a demonstrated need of $20,000, okay, based on the formula. Now, in reality, the family is saying, well, that's great that our EFC is $20,000. We really can only afford $15,000. We have an actual need of $25,000. So when the school comes back and they give their awards, they're saying, okay, because of your demonstrated need, we're going to give you a $5,000 grant. Also, because you have need, you can hit that direct subsidized loan, and we're going to give you the maximum amount of $3,500. You're going to be able to tap into the unsubsidized loan for $2,000. So between the loans and the grants, you've got a total of $10,500. So you still have a remaining actual need of $14,500. And for that amount, you're going to have to tap into those private or plus loans. Now, on the flip side, let's take a look at a family whose EFC is higher than the cost of attendance. In this case, the same school, cost of attendance is $40,000, but our second family has an EFC of $45,000. They have a demonstrated need of $0, all right? But the family resources, again, don't necessarily line up to the EFC. Now, they're able to do a little bit more. They can do $25,000 a year, but they still have an actual need of $15,000. Now, in this case, because the family has $0 demonstrated need based on the calculations, they are not going to get a grant. They're not going to get the subsidized loan. They can get that unsubsidized loan, but that's only allowed them to tap into $2,000 from that whole process. They still got to fill $13,000, and for that, they're going to have to tap into those private or plus loans. Now, this may be something that your kids aren't thinking about right away, but I want people to understand this part of it, and it's how we repay the loans, all right? Now, the standard repayment for any of those federal direct loans is a flat monthly payment spread out over 10 years. You're going to have a higher monthly payment than you can with some of the other plans, but you're going to be paying less in the long run overall because the interest just isn't having time to build up like it does with some of the other options. One of the other popular options that's out there is called an income-based repayment plan. Now, this can be nice because, a lot of kids, when they start off that first job, maybe they're not making, a ton of money. And if you go with the standard repayment plan, you kind of got that big payment right out. It can be painful to have that larger payment right out of the gate. The income-based repayment plan is intended to kind of make that pain a little bit less. You're going to be looking at 10 to 15% of your discretionary income, which is, they got a whole formula and calculation around that, of your discretionary income each year is going to be targeted to pay off your student loan. And they're going to do that over a 20 to 25 year repayment length. So one thing to note with that is your payment amount is going to change each year as your income does as well. Well, the other key thing here is whatever still is unpaid at the end of that 20 or 25 years will be forgiven. And your payments are never going to be more than what you would have had with the standard repayment plan. But because you're stretching that out over 20 to 25 years, you are going to pay more in total over the course of the run of that loan than if you just did it over 10 years. And one of the other things I want people to think about when they do this is if you were taking out a 25-year loan, think about when you graduate college, the age you are, and what age you're going to be when that loan's paid off. So, again, my daughter is going to be going to college in the fall of 2021, and if we've been saving for her college since she was born. Now, if I'd had a 25-year repayment term on my student loans, I would have just finished paying that off 2 years ago. So all that time that I'd been saving for our daughter's education, I still would have been paying off my student loans, which definitely probably would have impacted the amount of money I would have been able to make available for her education. So that's just something to think about. A lot of people see that and they go, oh, it's a lower monthly payment, sign me up, I'm in. Just understand that you're signing that up for that for a very long time. It's kind of like having a mini mortgage. Another program that's available to people out there is called the Public Student Loan Forgiveness. This is a program that forgives remaining balances of loans. The catch is you've got to be employed by some sort of governmental or nonprofit agency full-time. You have to have a federal direct or a federal consolidation loan, which I will touch on in a minute. You have to be on an income-based repayment plan, and you had to have made 10 straight years of on-time payments. So there are some tight restrictions on this that keep a lot of people from qualifying for this program. May have seen news stories about this that people have applied and 97% of the people are rejected for this program, and that's because there are these rules around it. A lot of people apply for this student loan forgiveness not knowing what the criteria is to qualify for it. And it's also something that just started. I think it was put into place probably like 12 years ago. So we're just in these first couple of years where people can actually get the forgiveness. And if you're not checking one of these boxes, you're not eligible. So it can be difficult to qualify, but is an option for people who are working for, again, a governmental agency or a nonprofit. Some other ways that loans can be forgiven is there is a program specifically for teachers. Work 5 years as a teacher, working with some lower income students. If your school closes. So this happens more with like the for-profit schools, right? Think of your University of Phoenix and those types of schools like that. Some of those have closed over the course of the years. Some online schools, things like that haven't made it. And they will get rid of your student loans if that happens. Also, obviously some things we don't want to see happen to you: total and permanent disability, death. And I say only possible through bankruptcy because generally student loans are not forgiven through bankruptcy. Okay, they stick with you. Now, federal loan consolidation. So we've graduated, we're paying our loans back, we've got everything done. This is an option to you because you are going to apply for student loans potentially every single year. So you're going to end up with these different batches of loans that you're paying off. And if you want to just kind of make your life simple and say, hey, I just want this all in one package, you could look at a federal loan consolidation. This would be taking all of those loans that you would have accumulated over the course of the years in college, rolling them up into one, and then you can do different things with the payment terms. Again, you could extend that loan out to 30 years, lowering your payment. Again, because you are then working in the federal loan program, you can be eligible for income-based repayment or that student loan forgiveness program. The catch with this is, if you're already in one of those, you might reset the clock that you'd already started on those for the income-based repayment or the student loan forgiveness. So if this is something, and I know this would be years down the road, right? We're talking to kids that are still in high school. This is already ones that graduated college. Parents, just make sure that if this is a road you have to go down, you're talking with your kids and making sure that if this is something that they look at, that they are making sure what they're doing and if it will trigger any of those clock resets, because we don't want that. Also, there's refinancing. A lot of people get very confused. What's the difference between a consolidation and a refinance? They're essentially the same thing. The key difference is the refinance you're doing not with the government, all right? You're doing it with just some sort of non-government lender, could be a bank. The industry leader in this is SoFi. Maybe you've heard of them. They've got their name on a beautiful new $5 billion football stadium that the Los Angeles football teams are playing in. Now, the difference with this is any of your loans can be refinanced. So not just those federal loans. You can bring in your federal loans. You can bring in private loans, plus loans, you name it. You can bring them all under this umbrella and get them refinanced. And depending upon where you're at, you might be able to get even better interest rates than you would with any of the other programs. And you've got a lot of flexibility as far as what you could get with your payment terms. Now, the downside with this type of option is you lose that access to the income-based repayment plans and the student loan forgiveness. So, on the back end, it's kind of just really what works for you, what your situation is, what makes the most sense. Those are conversations for a different day. Just want people to be aware of kind of how things work on the back end and what you're signing up for with student loans. So that is all I have for, the bulk of the presentation piece of it. We'll open it up for questions here. This is my contact information. So, again, this is being recorded and it's out there. If you have any desire to get a hold of me, here's my contact information. I'll make a quick plug before we begin Q&A on the service that I provide. As I said, I work with families to help them find colleges that are a financial fit, meaning that we take a look at the student profile, your family resources, marry those together, and work to find schools, some things that I'm aware of within financial planning, some tools that I have access to, where I can kind of automate that search and highlight schools that will either give scholarships where you're a good candidate for this need-based criteria, whatever it is, to try to bring that cost of the school down to something that works with your family resources. So if there's any desire from anybody to be involved in that, I would love to hear from you. Okay, it looks like we've got some things coming up in the chat room. Here we go. Is it better to pay cash for schooling each year or have student take a loan? And then, should the student ever claim themselves while in school? So we'll take those one at a time. So the first question, is it better to pay cash for schooling each year or have the student take the loan? That is really a discussion for your individual family and what you think is best. If you've got the financial wherewithal to pay cash for it, as you go out of your cash flow or through other things that you've done, 529 savings, things like that. If you have 529 savings, I would say, yeah, absolutely use those instead of taking out a loan. If you're going to do it from cash flow, that's really up to you and your own personal financial situation and values and goals. I don't want to tell anybody that, some families place a different level of priority on that, and they're willing to hey, I'll take my 401k will take a back seat for a couple of years while my kid's in college, because it's so important to me that we cover the cost of the kid's college. Just understand there's ramifications with that. So I don't know that it's really hard to say that there is a blanket answer to that. It really depends on your unique family and student situation. The second question we've got here is, should a student ever claim themselves while in school? The truth of the matter is they really can't. As long as that kid is in school and you are providing more than 50% of their financial support, they're your dependent. So that's kind of, your kid would kind of really have to be on their own to not be claimed by the parent. Another question coming in: do schools consider financial aid from FAFSA when offering scholarships? So not if it's a merit-based scholarship, all right? So if again, you're at one of these schools and, let me rephrase that. Yes, they will. So what you will see very commonly at schools is if you're a candidate for both merit-based and need-based aid, the school will generally give you whatever the higher of those two totals are. So let's say you're going to a school that offers one of those automatic merit aid scholarships. You hit the GPA and the test scores, and you are in line for a $10,000 a year merit scholarship. On the other hand, you are also in line for $15,000 of need-based aid. Well, the school will give you that $15,000 in need-based aid, and then they probably won't do the scholarship, okay? So whichever of those two is bigger is what the schools will tend to offer. So yeah, so they do compare those. I do have a few other questions that have come up on this, and I'll go through those. How often do you have to file those, and when do you? This is a process. This FAFSA process is something that you will go through every year. You're going to do it when your kids are, going into your kid's freshman year. You will continue to fill out the FAFSA form if you are needing that financial aid every single year until they graduate. Now, I want to go back to one of the points that I had hit on earlier, where I said this cycle is going to be one where we could see a lot of appeals to schools based on that financial award thing. The reason for that being is, as I said, for this particular year, we're using our 2019 tax returns to file for those 2021 school year. So if your 2020 year has not been as financially rewarding as maybe that 2019 was because of COVID, that's something that you are going to want to appeal to the schools and say, hey, look, that's great. I know you based this off of this income I had in 2019. My 2020 sucked. So what I recorded here, that's not my reality anymore. And you can appeal a financial aid. They don't like using the word negotiate. You can appeal a financial aid, provide them with the new information and realities of your life financially, and they will reconsider that the financial aid package that you got. But that is a process you will go through every year. Another question is, around those scholarships, we talked about schools going test optional, and we're starting to see some schools going test optional as far as that merit aid goes. And are more schools going to tend to go there? I think we will continue to see more, predominantly state schools. They're going to go test optional from that, automatic merit aid perspective. The private schools can really do whatever they want. They control their purse strings, so they can give you money for any reason really that they kind of feel fit. But the public state schools, from an admissions perspective, they can drive their own admissions policies, which is why so many schools, and we're up to like 1,400 schools, have said we're going to go test optional from an admissions perspective. The scholarships, though, is largely a mechanism of state funding. So that's something that either the state legislature has voted on, some sort of board of governors has decided that. And so some of these states are waiting, and have had to wait months for like the reconvening of a state legislature to come in and approve that. So I think that there's a likelihood that we will see more of that continue to trickle in. But part of it also is there's also a risk that we kind of run out of time on that. So I wouldn't say that every school is going to go there, but we might see a few more. Finally, a question that we see with this is, how does early decision, early action affect this whole process? And the truth is, it really doesn't. Early decision, early action, regular decision, rolling decision is really an admissions issue, doesn't really have anything to do with financial aid. The one thing that I would want to make really clear to somebody is, if you are wanting, to attend a much more selective school that offers that early decision is binding with that school. So you get one shot to apply early decision, and if they accept you, you are bound to go to that school. So make sure that that is a school that it's the school you absolutely want to go to above anything else, but also note that that better be a school you can afford, because you are kind of committing to going to that school before you get any of this financial aid information, okay? That doesn't mean your early decision, you're going to be a better candidate for financial aid. No, that decision will come separately. That early decision is a admissions lever that you can pull, not financial aid. Early action just means you're kind of taking the VIP line, if you will, kind of getting that VIP pass as far from an admissions perspective. Again, doesn't really have anything to do with the financial aid process at all. It's just an admissions, but that's a non-binding decision. You can apply early action to schools. You can do that to multiple schools. It just kind of pushes you earlier in the line to get that acceptance back or not. So, okay, with that, let's see. I don't see any more questions coming in. I think that should cover things. So I want to thank everybody for attending. Again, we'll make the Zoom recording of this available online on the different social media platforms. So I hope you got value out of this, and it's something that you can use for your families. Again, those forms are going to open up tomorrow for you. Good luck with that. Again, if you have any questions or anything, feel free to contact me at 7th Street. And, again, good luck with you and your kids with your college journey. Thank you, and good night.